Welcome to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast, hosted by award-winning television director, documentary filmmaker, author, and speaker Craig D. Forrest. Join Craig for the next few minutes as he interviews leaders, artists, and creatives about trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. This podcast is produced and brought to you by Matchstick Media International. Now, here's Craig.
Welcome to the podcast. Glad that you joined us today from across the world. We are in over 20 countries now, and maybe about half of the United States as far as representation, and that's great. The podcast is growing. It's all about interesting people and interesting conversations. We have a friend, and not my colleague. She's a colleague of my other great friend, J.R. Baker. This is Connie Baker, and she is a licensed professional counselor, master's degree, and also I'm sure certifications for things, and has a private practice. She has also been in the past a university instructor, seminar speaker, published writer, and a trauma recovery specialist. Wow.
Right.
How about putting that on your business card, a trauma recovery specialist? Connie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Very, very great to be here, Craig.
We are going to talk about a subject that in all the years I've worked in television ministries, television networks, faith-based media, has never ever been considered that I can think of until I was able to get a hold of your book and to talk with you a little bit more about religious abuse. Oh my goodness. First of all, describe in a nutshell what religious abuse incorporates. What is it?
Yes, boy, that's an important first question. Because, Craig, it's not out there yet. Culturally, socially, within our society, we don't have words for this thing yet. So I appreciate you asking me to define it right off the bat. And religious or spiritual abuse, I use those terms interchangeably, what that is, it follows the same line as any other type of abuse. It is where one person or an institution has more power than another individual and uses that power, usually leveraging the ideas of God or religion, to hurt or exploit, control, manipulate, weaken, silence another person. It is using that power, someone who has more power, to do damage or control another person with that power. In religious abuse, it's specifically leveraging the idea of God.
Well, that sounds like a dangerous road to be going down, and I'm sure that this has gone on for millennia. It didn't just show up and rear its ugly head last Tuesday.
No, it did not.
It's been going on probably since the Old Testament.
At least.
And then one could also go off on a side trail, that the pagan religions as well over across our globe over many thousands of years have had the same type of abuse with their form of a deity or deities.
Yes.
And you have to fall in line. Is that about right?
Exactly. Well, we tend to want power and control over other people, unfortunately, a lot of times. And so that has been leveraged, I think, since the dawn of time, to leverage God. And I don't think it's unique to Christianity or evangelicalism, even though that is my background. You're correct. I think it's been around here for a long, long time.
I want to make sure at the very outset to our audience, whether you're listening or you've shared or going to be sharing this podcast, this conversation about religious abuse is not meant to be just a slam on institutions and such. It's meant to give insight and recovery to those who have been at the hands of religious abuse, male, female, children, wherever your stage of life is at. So going in, as we explain and talk to Connie, learn more over the next few minutes, it's not a slam on these. I think we can learn from that, yeah?
Yes, and I would take that even a step further, Craig. I would say my heart behind the book that I've written and the speaking I'm doing on this topic, my heart is actually for spiritually healthy communities, spiritually healthy
Sounds like the New Testament to me.
Something like that, maybe. Exactly. So, and I know that my book and how I speak out against the abuses within the church often is going to be misconstrued as me possibly trying to damage the church or speak ill of it or damage God's reputation, which I think is actually kind of funny. Like if he's that small, I think God can take care of himself. But the issue is, I want to see health and vitality and freedom and breathing room and good things in a Christian spiritual community, or actually any religious community, but I want to see health in those things.
We are talking to trauma recovery specialist Connie A. Baker in the podcast, and we will be back in 32 seconds.
This podcast features engaging conversations with leaders, artists, and creatives sharing about current trends and insights shaping our digital world and faith-based media. Today's episode is produced by Matchstick Media International, a nonprofit that's passionate about inspiring both visionary leaders and young creatives to harness the power of media to further the gospel. To learn more, visit us at matchstickmedia.org. Now, back to Craig.
We're back talking to Connie A. Baker. You can find her at connieabaker.com, having a good but clarifying conversation. I don't think I've used that word in 10 years. Clarifying conversation about religious abuse. What is it, and what does it entail? And in a moment, we're going to talk about how do you recover from it. How did you have the germ, the genesis of wanting to cover this subject and this dynamic?
I always say that if you want to look at it, if you ever want to know the personal history of a therapist, look at what they're specializing in. Because, and that's not, of course, true across the board, but boy, it holds a lot of the time. And part of my story has to do with pretty significant religious abuse. I was, is it okay to kind of tell my story at this point?
Yes, please.
Yeah, because that's very much a part of my passion and my heart. When I was 19 years old, I was in Bible school, and I started attending a church there that I just adored. I gave my heart and my soul and my blood for that place. And at the very beginning of my time there, I met one of the pastors who was about my father's age, and married, children, and was just really took an interest in me. And I was heading overseas onto the mission field, and he kind of took me under his wing and mentored me. He became a dear friend. 6 years later, he started making sexual advances toward me, and he ended up sexually abusing me for around 9 months.
How old were you at this time?
I was then 25. So I was, and I now look back and see that it was grooming taking place through those years. And so that was really difficult. But Craig, I always say that was only a quarter of the damage done. 3/4 to me of the damage done to my soul, my spirit, was I came back to the church leadership, and they blamed me. And then they had me get up in front of the church and confess my sin 2 times in 2 services, and then told me it was time for me to leave the church. And this was my whole social community. This was my whole everything. This was my life. That church was everything. And so
This must have been devastating.
It was beyond. It was, what kind of word? Shattering, devastating. Yes, it was. It really destroyed me for a while, honestly, spiritually. After that, I was suicidal. I was going through horrible depression. I was going through panic attacks to the point I passed out one time. And just really severe, now I understand them to be traumatic responses to what I had gone through. And the level of trauma and devastation that I'd been through on several levels. And so, yeah, it took me about 10 years. No one was talking about, I finally figured out about 3 or 4 years in that this was sexual abuse, that had happened to me, but I had no framework, nothing to wrap my head around what had happened within that church and what the leadership had done in response to the sexual abuse. So it took me a long time to do some major sorting and figure out I was going to actually make it through. It was shattering. Yeah.
Wow. And then how long ago, by the way, let's make sure that people can find you and find this book, which is relatively new. I think it's only a few years old.
No, it's just since June. This is months old.
This is, I'm holding it in my hands and my hands are burning because it's so hot out of the oven. Oh, I'm going to need a trauma recovery specialist.
That's right, you will.
I'm quite sure of that. It's called Traumatized by Religious Abuse. Good, catchy phrase. Traumatized by Religious Abuse. And it's by Connie Baker. You can find Connie at conniebaker.com.
Connie A. Baker.
Oh.
Got to put that little initial in
I thought
there.
it was conniebaker.com.
No,
It's Connie A. Baker?
Mm-hmm.
There must be another Connie Baker out there.
Well, yes.
Or you wanted to make it specific.
I did, and they wanted to charge me for Connie Baker, too. So
that's abuse right there.
There it is.
That's right, guys at GoDaddy. Sorry, I love you, GoDaddy. You're doing good for me.
Hey, they figured out how to make money. I say let them.
ConnieABaker.com. And the Connie is spelled Connie, which is how it is probably spelled 90% of the time. ConnieABaker.com. You will find resources there, ways probably to follow Connie and schedules and other things.
Facebook page.
Oh, hey.
A
Good.
Facebook page, Connie A. Baker. And also, I have a Facebook group of about 430, right now, I think it's around 430 survivors, religious abuse survivors, called Overcoming Religious Abuse Community. And I'd welcome anybody who wants to be a part of that.
And I would think you are probably going to hear from somebody very soon after this podcast airs. Now, our podcast is primarily about 4 subjects that have a confluence, an interweaving, so to speak, and it's media, culture, faith, and the church. And whenever I talk to someone, it doesn't necessarily have to be about media. It could be about modern day culture. It could be the dynamics of faith, near or far, or inside cultures, and the church, which also means ministries as well, and should mean ministries. But as Connie and I were getting ready to have this conversation, she said, well, what tact, what aim do you want me, Connie, to take? And I said, well, me, Craig Forrest, that's worked for Christian TV networks and ministries and such. Is there an aspect of media that is the conduit, the carrier, the communications portal that continues that abuse? Television, social media today, because you can shame people on a Facebook post
Any way you want. The conduits are endless, right?
Radio. I'm not going to shame anybody on a podcast. That's not going to 100%. That's not going to happen on this podcast. But pick up that thread of a thought. How does media fundraising appeals, and if you call me right now and you need to be part of what we're doing, and also the pointing of fingers at other parts of society or other parts. We recently had a squabble between women ministries, that is women ministers, that's just come up between a prominent conservative pastor and a very well-known lady, Beth Moore. And now there's squabbles about that. So pick up that thread about how media oftentimes becomes the communications device to perpetuate that religious abuse.
Well, it's a very good and a very broad question. You know, when we often think of religious abuse, we think of it, those of us who work in this arena, think of it in terms of within a church congregation or some nonprofit organization or a small group or even a family. The contexts are numerous, and we often visualize it being human to human in space contact, rather than online or through the airwaves. And I love this angle, Craig, because, first of all, you know media around 1,001 times better than I ever will. And but what I do know is what you just said. It can come through the messages of religious abuse and the power plays and the manipulation and the coercion and the silencing and all those things.
And shaming.
The shaming, the guilting, the shaming. All of those can come through social media, online presence, and you already said radio, television. Are we missing anything? I don't know. The whole
Oh, well, you could do texting.
texting.
Yeah, once somebody has your phone.
Totally. FaceTime. Yeah, exactly. You can do all of it because the essence of religious abuse is that power over, that having power over someone else, leveraging God or religious ideas. So under that context, I think all of us listening to this are probably going, oh, check. I've heard it here. I've heard it there,
And they probably didn't recognize that at the time.
No. And a lot of times that is what is so insidious. There was a book written around the 1990. It was the first one I know of on this topic. And I love it just for the title. It was called The Subtle Power of Spiritual Abuse. And it's a very Christian book. It's written from a very Christian angle. And it, as opposed to mine is a little bit more therapeutic, even though I definitely am a believer, my book takes it from a therapeutic, more trauma lens. This book takes it from a very Christian angle, and the title itself, The Subtle Power. Oh my goodness, the subtle power of spiritual abuse. So there's subtleties involved with anybody who's manipulating or power playing. We often think of an abuser if we say, oh, that person, that pastor was abusive, or that radio personality was abusive. We kind of tend to see this mean, scrunched up face and this angry scowl, and that is not how it often presents. It often presents in charm and persuasion and a charismatic, likable personality that people follow and gravitate to.
That's the outside view.
Yes, the outside view is what they lead with. And so there's subtlety around how this can get out in the media. There's subtlety about how they will speak about money. There's subtlety about how they will speak about guilt and shame. There's subtlety about, sometimes not subtlety, about what they should be doing politically. There's all kinds of things in the mix here that are used to control for the benefit of the controller.
Wonderful conversation with Connie A. Baker, talking about religious abuse in many forms and many dynamics, including media. And we hope that you will join us for the next conversation, the next episode, as we continue our talk with Connie.
You've been listening to the 6 Ways to Sunday podcast with Craig D. Forrest, brought to you by Matchstick Media International, dedicated to excellence in media through inspiration, vision, and education. To learn more, visit us on the web at matchstickmedia.org. That's matchstickmedia.org. Your generous donations, large or small, help defray costs for producing this creative podcast. Thanks for listening and subscribing.